I've always had a goal to hit 1,000 likes on a video, but you legends smashed past that and got one of my videos to over 2K likes. Let's break even more records on this video. Please smash that like button.
I should have just called a cab. It's funny how many bad nights start with that one thought. At the time, it didn't seem like a huge deal. We had a decent night, nothing life-changing, nothing terrible. A couple of drinks at a small bar, some greasy late-night food from this food truck she said she loved, and then we started making our way back toward the main road to find a ride. It was one of those nights where the city feels quieter than it should. Not dead, but slower. The kind of night where you only see one car every couple minutes, and most of the shops have their lights off. I wasn't even tired yet, just in that in-between state where you're not sure if you should keep hanging out or call it a night. She was in a good mood, though, way more upbeat than me. She kept rambling about random things, this weird dream she'd had, some drama between her friends, how the fries we just ate weren't as good as she remembered. She laughed at her own stories, laughed at things I didn't think were all that funny, and I laughed along anyway. It was fine. We were maybe 5 minutes from the strip of bars and restaurants where you can actually find taxis or ride shares without waiting forever when she suddenly stopped and pointed. It was this narrow alley between two old storefronts. The metal shutters were down on both sides, covered in layers of faded graffiti. She said it was a shortcut, would cut the walk in half. I looked at it and instantly didn't like it. There was just one dim light flickering near the far end. The rest was shadows, the kind of place you avoid unless you got no other option. I said something about maybe just sticking to the main road, but she laughed and told me she walked it all the time. She said it so casually that I started second-guessing myself. So I went along. The second we stepped in, the sound from the street faded. It was weird how fast it changed. The air felt colder. It smelled different too. Damp concrete, old garbage. Our footsteps echoed more than I expected. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and kept my eyes moving. Not because I thought anything was going to happen, but because my brain was on autopilot. City alleys at night just make you more alert. We were about halfway through when it happened. Two guys stepped out from behind a dumpster like they'd been waiting for a queue. Both had hoodies pulled low over their faces. One of them said her name. Not like he was guessing, like he knew her. I felt my stomach drop. Before I could even get a full thought together, the other guy moved fast and planted himself in front of me. His hand went straight to my chest and shoved me back into the wall. The cold brick hit between my shoulder blades. The first guy moved to my side, close enough that I could smell whatever cheap cologne he'd drowned himself in. Between the two of them, I was boxed in with nowhere to move. They didn't waste time. They told me to hand over my phone, my wallet, my watch. Flat like they'd done it before. I glanced at her, expecting some kind of reaction. Panic, confusion, anything. But she just stood there, arms crossed, watching like she was waiting for a bus. Not scared, not frozen. Just still. That was the moment I knew. I pulled my phone out first, then my wallet. I didn't argue, didn't stall. The taller guy was holding a small bag, and I could hear the dull clunk when my phone hit the bottom. I hesitated on the watch for half a second. It wasn't even expensive, but I wore it every day. Taking it off felt heavier than it should have. When they had everything, they didn't run. They didn't even look around. The one who'd said her name gave her a short nod, like some unspoken confirmation. She nodded back. Then they walked deeper into the alley, slow and casual, until the dark swallowed them completely. She looked at me for a moment like she was checking to see if I was going to say something. I didn't. My mouth felt dry, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. Without a word, she started walking toward the main road like nothing had happened. I followed because I didn't know what else to do. Every step felt strange, like I was moving through something thicker than air. Outside the alley, the noise of the street came rushing back. Cars passing. Music from a bar patio. People talking and laughing. But for me, it was like hearing it through glass. She muttered something about hoping I was okay, then said she had to get going. No offer to help me find a ride. No checking if I had cash left. She just disappeared into the crowd near the bars. I stood there for a while, not sure what my next move was. My pockets felt wrong, too empty. I kept running my tongue over the inside of my cheek without thinking about it. My brain kept replaying the same pieces. The way he'd said her name, her arms crossed, the nod, the timing. Eventually, I spotted a security guard standing outside a club. I asked to borrow their phone and called a friend. I didn't give the full story, just said I'd been mugged and needed a ride. The drive home was quiet except for my friend asking if I was sure I was okay. I wasn't my say I was. I kept picturing her face in that alley. Calm. Almost bored, like she'd seen it 100 times before. By the time I got home, I'd stopped feeling angry. I wasn't even sure what I felt. Just disconnected. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at my hands. My watched hand looked strange without the actual watch there. She never reached out after that night. No text. No follow request. Nothing. I didn't try to contact her either. There wasn't anything left to say. But even now, if I'm walking at night and pass an alley, I slow down without meaning to. I think about how easy it is for someone to make you feel safe just long enough to get you where they want you. I think about how fast the world can go quiet. And I think about how that night I didn't just lose my phone, my wallet, my watch. I lost the idea that bad situations would ever surprise me again. It was supposed to be just a ride home. That's it. Nothing else. No weird stops, no detours, no drama. Just a simple end to a simple first meetup. We'd met earlier that evening for the first time. Nothing fancy. Just coffee and a short walk near the downtown area. He seemed fine. A little too sure of himself maybe, like the kind of guy who laughs at his own jokes before he finishes them, but not in a way that set off alarms. I figured we'd hang out for a bit, make some small talk, and then go our separate ways. When the night started to wind down, he offered to drive me back. It was late, the air was cold enough to bite through my jacket, and honestly, the idea of waiting for a bus or paying for a rideshare didn't sound appealing. I said yes. The first part of the drive was normal. He had some playlist going, not too loud, just a steady background to the conversation. We were passing through a couple of well-lit streets, the kind where people are still walking their dogs or coming out of corner stores. I remember thinking I'd be home in maybe 10 minutes. Then he mentioned he was hungry. Said he wanted to grab a snack before heading back. No big deal, right? I figured we'd hit a gas station, he'd grab a soda and some chips, and we'd be on our way. I wasn't in a rush, so I told him sure. He pulled into this gas station on the edge of town. One of those places where the lights are buzzing overhead and the sign out front is missing a few letters. There was just one other car on the lot, parked near the side, and one lone attendant inside behind the counter. He parked near the front, cut the engine, and then turned to me. That's when he asked to see my phone. Said his battery was dying, and he wanted to look up something for later. He held his hand out like it wasn't even a question. I hesitated for maybe a second. I didn't know him well, sure, but we'd spent the last couple of hours together without anything weird happening. So I handed it over. I figured he'd scroll for a minute, maybe check something, and give it right back. Instead, he opened his door, got out, and started walking toward the store. My phone was still in his hand. I watched him walk across the front of the car, but instead of going through the sliding glass doors into the gas station, he kept going. He moved past the entrance, around the front of the hood, and toward the driver's side. That's when my stomach dropped. I grabbed the handle of the passenger door and pulled. Locked? I tried again, harder this time. Still locked. He didn't look at me. Not once. He slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and started the car. I knocked on the window, saying his name. He didn't respond. He just shifted into gear and pulled out of the lot. It happened so fast I barely processed it. 1 second I was sitting there with my phone. The next I was standing in the middle of a mostly empty parking lot with nothing. No phone. No bag. No ID. Nothing except the clothes I was wearing and the sound of his car getting smaller and smaller in the distance. I just stood there for a few seconds, staring at the road. My breath fogged in the cold air, and the buzzing from the gas station lights suddenly seemed deafening. Finally, I walked toward the store. The attendant looked up at me, confused, as I stepped inside. I told them what happened, but my voice didn't sound like mine. It was flat, almost like I was telling them a story I heard about someone else. They let me use the store phone to call a friend. While I waited, I stood near the front windows, scanning the road in case his car came back. It didn't. The inside of the store felt weirdly bright. The fluorescent lights were sharp, making everything look a little too real. I could hear every little sound. The hum of the refrigerators, the mop bucket sloshing in the corner. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept rubbing them against my jeans to try to make it stop. It was maybe 15 minutes before my friend pulled in, but it felt like hours. The second I got into her car, I sank into the seat and just stared straight ahead. She kept asking me what happened, but I didn't even know where to start. The whole ride home, my brain was looping back to that moment in the parking lot. The way he held out his hand for my phone like it was nothing, the way I'd handed it over without thinking, the way it took only seconds for everything to flip. When we got to my place, I locked the door behind me and sat on the couch. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional car passing outside. My phone was gone. All my contacts, my messages, my photos, gone. And somewhere out there, the guy I'd met less than 3 hours ago was scrolling through it. Or maybe he tossed it already. I had no way of knowing. The longer I sat there, the more details started popping into my head. How he parked closer to the exit of the lot than to the store entrance. How he hadn't even glanced at the snacks inside before cutting around the car. How he locked the doors before getting out without me noticing. And then there was the part I didn't even want to think about, the fact that he knew exactly where I lived. I still don't know why he really took it. If it was just the phone, or if he wanted something more. All I know is that when I handed it over, I thought it was just a favor. Something quick, harmless. Turns out, it was the start of the worst ride home I've ever had. The date was going fine until she said it. We were sitting in this dim little cocktail bar downtown, the kind of place that feels like it's trying really hard to be effortlessly cool. Mismatched chairs, candles stuck into old wine bottles, handwritten menus clipped to bits of wood. The lighting was that mix of warm and shadowy where you can see someone's face but not clearly enough to know if they're lying. She had some bright red drink in a short glass. No idea what it was, but it looked expensive. I had a beer, mostly because I didn't want to deal with asking the bartender what was in half the stuff on the menu. The music was low, some slow jazzy thing, just soft enough that you could hear the clink of ice in other people's glasses. We'd already done the usual first date checklist, where we grew up, jobs, hobbies, movies we liked. She was different. Not in an obvious way, but in the way her eye contact felt. Like when most people look at you, it's casual, like they're following the rhythm of the conversation. With her, it was locked in. A little too long, a little too steady, not blinking much. And when she laughed, it always came just a half second late, like she'd run the moment through some kind of mental filter before deciding it was funny. I noticed it, but at that point, I just thought maybe she was socially awkward. Halfway through my drink, she reached out, tapped the rim of my glass with her finger, and said it. "Don't worry, I didn't poison yours." Flat, no smile, no wink, no lift in her tone. Just said it like she was reading off a receipt. She leaned back slowly, but her hand stayed resting lightly on the table. She didn't break eye contact. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd misheard, but the way she was looking at me, waiting, told me I hadn't. My brain started scrambling for an explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she was one of those people who like super dark humor. Maybe she thought it would be edgy and playful. But the silence after she said it stretched too long. It wasn't the silence you get after a joke where someone's waiting for you to laugh. It was the kind where someone's watching to see what you'll do. I took a sip of my beer just to make the moment pass. It was automatic, almost like my body didn't want to admit I was thrown off. And while I drank, I caught her eyes drop for a split second to the exact spot where they last touched my mouth. The conversation didn't really recover after that. Every answer I gave was shorter than before. I kept my hands near the glass, but I didn't drink much more. She kept her gaze on me like I was a test she was grading. Every so often, her fingers would tap the table. Slow, steady, almost rhythmic. I thought about making an excuse to leave, but I didn't want to look paranoid. We were still mid-date, and I figured I could just ride it out. I told myself I'd finish my drink, split the bill, and get out without it being weird. But then I started noticing more little things. How she hadn't touched her own drink in a while. How her body was angled just slightly toward mine, like she was keeping track of every movement. How she seemed more interested in watching me than talking. When the bartender came by to check on us, I set my glass down without taking another sip. I could feel her notice that I hadn't touched it, but she didn't say anything. Her expression didn't change, but there was this faint tightness at the corners of her mouth. I asked if she wanted to order food, hoping maybe eating would reset the vibe. She shook her head slowly. No smile, just that same steady stare. At one point, I realized I'd started covering the top of my glass with my hand whenever I looked away without even thinking about it. It wasn't conscious. It just happened. My eyes kept flicking back to it like I was making sure it was still the same glass, same drink, same level. The longer we sat there, the heavier the air felt. I could feel the heat creeping up the back of my neck even though the room was cool. The candle on the table flickered a little when someone opened the bar door, and for some reason, I found myself staring at the shadows it cast on her face. Eventually, I said I had an early start the next morning. No apology, no excuse beyond that. She just nodded once and said we could go. We walked out together. She didn't look away from me, even while we were stepping onto the street. It wasn't like normal eye contact. It was like she was trying to memorize me. The night air was cool, but my palms were sweaty. I said goodbye quick without offering a hug or handshake and started toward my car. When I unlocked it and got in, I looked back before closing the door. She was still standing by the bar entrance, hands in her pockets watching. I drove home with the radio off. No distractions. Just the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of the tires rolling over cracks in the road. I kept replaying the moment in the bar. The way her finger tapped the rim of my glass, the flat tone in her voice, the way she didn't laugh after. When I got home, I poured myself a big glass of water and drank it standing at the sink. I hadn't even finished the beer, but I wanted to wash the taste out of my mouth. It was probably nothing. That's what I keep telling myself. But there was something in her stare, something steady and certain. That makes me think I'll never really know. Now, when people make jokes about spiking drinks, I don't laugh. I just remember the way she said it and how she didn't smile after. I didn't think telling him no would turn into anything. We got out once. A casual drink at a place downtown. Nothing fancy. He seemed fine. Talked a little too much about his gym routine, but whatever, it was just a drink. Toward the end of the night, he asked if I wanted to see him again. I told him I didn't think we were a match. Said it with a smile, thanked him for the evening. He didn't get mad, didn't push back, just gave this slow nod, said he understood, and walked me to my car. We hugged briefly, and I got in. That was it. I drove off thinking, well, that's wrapped up. The next morning, I slept in. No alarm. The sun was already coming in through the blinds, cutting across the bed in those skinny little stripes that make everything look warmer than it is. I was half awake, scrolling through my phone, not really processing anything I was seeing. That's when I noticed movement. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a tree branch swaying outside. My room faces the side yard, and sometimes the light does weird things through the leaves. But then it happened again, slower this time, more solid. I looked toward the window and my whole body went cold. It wasn't a shadow. It was a person. A man. Standing right outside my bedroom window. It took me a second to even register the details. The jacket was the first thing. Same dark bomber jacket he'd worn on our date. Then the haircut. Then the face. It was him. He wasn't moving. Just standing there perfectly still, staring straight in at me. I stopped breathing. My phone was still in my hand, but my fingers had gone so stiff it felt like I couldn't move them. My brain started firing off random, useless thoughts like, maybe he's lost, or maybe he's here for something else. But there was no reason for him to be in my yard, let alone outside my bedroom. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever. I didn't want him to see me react. I didn't want him to know I was scared, even though I knew he could probably tell just by looking at me. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, my feet barely touching the floor. My robe was draped over the chair, and I grabbed it without taking my eyes off the window. I moved to the far side of the room, out of his line of sight. Then I peeked, just a little. Still there, same position, same expression, like he was waiting for something. I thought about calling someone, but my brain kept looping on, if you do that, he'll see you do it. Which didn't make sense. He was already watching me, but logic wasn't exactly running the show at that point. My bedroom window faces the side yard, which means he'd either come in through the driveway or from the back. Either way, he had to walk through private property to get there. And there's no gate in the front. He chose to come around, not knock on the door. That's not someone stopping by to chat. I backed out of the room and into the hallway, finally looking down at my phone like I'd forgotten it was there. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I still hadn't decided if I was going to call the police. Instead, I went to the kitchen and called my friend who lives 5 minutes away. I kept my voice low. Told her there was someone outside my window. She didn't ask for details, just said she was coming. While I waited, I stood in the living room with the curtains drawn, peeking through a thin gap toward the side yard. He was still there, still watching. The weird thing was, he wasn't even trying to hide. No pretending to check his phone, no pacing like he was unsure if he should knock. Just standing with his hands at his sides, head tilted slightly forward, eyes locked on the window. It was probably less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour before my friend's car pulled into the driveway. That was the first time he moved. His head turned toward the sound, slow, like he was curious but not alarmed. Then he shifted his weight, took a step back, and walked away toward the street. Not fast. Not like someone getting caught. Just casual, like he decided he was done. I opened the door before my friend could even knock, pulled her inside, and shut it behind us. She went straight to the window, but by then he was gone. We sat there for a while, neither of us saying much. I could tell she wanted me to call the police, but I kept brushing it off. Said it was just weird and maybe he wanted to talk. I told myself the same thing, even though deep down I knew that wasn't it. Later that afternoon, when the adrenaline had worn off, the reality hit me harder. He'd been outside my bedroom, in the morning, watching me until I woke up. I had no idea how long he'd been there before I opened my eyes. I blocked his number, checked every lock in the house, closed all the blinds. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me think he was back. Every car passing outside made me picture him in the yard again. And the image I can't shake, the one that pops into my head every time I wake up early now, is him standing in that pale morning light, not moving, not blinking, just watching. When she offered to pick me up for the date, I didn't think much of it. She'd said she loved driving and had a big car, so in my head I pictured an SUV or maybe a big crossover, something practical but nice. It was one of those mild evenings where the air is just cool enough for a jacket. I was standing out on the curb, scrolling on my phone to kill time, glancing up every few seconds for headlights. That's when I heard it, a low, uneven rumble from around the corner. Not the smooth purr of a sedan or the hum of an SUV, but something older with a mechanical cough in its rhythm. The sound grew louder until the shape emerged under the street lamp. Not an SUV, not a truck, not even a regular car. It was an unmarked white van. No company logos, no bumper stickers. Just plain white metal that looked like it hadn't seen soap in months. The paint was dull, and on one of the side panels was a dent big enough to catch the light and warp it. A patch of rust bloomed near the wheel well. The van slowed as it reached me, the headlights throwing long shadows across the curb. The passenger window squealed as it rolled down, and she leaned over from the driver's seat. She waved casually like she'd just pulled up in a brand new convertible. "Hop in," she said, smiling. I hesitated. My first thought was that maybe she borrowed it from a relative or a friend. Some people drive whatever they can get their hands on. But there was something about the way the van idled, like the sound filled up the whole street, that made me feel exposed. Still, I reached for the handle. The door felt heavier than it should have been, like it hadn't been opened much lately. The moment I climbed in, my stomach tightened. There were no back seats. At all. The space behind us was stripped bare, nothing but a rubber floor mat stretching across to the back doors. The walls were scuffed and dented in places, the metal raw and scratched. A couple of bungee cords hung loose from a hook near the rear. The air inside smelled faintly of oil and something damp, like wet carpet that had never fully dried. The passenger seat was stiff and upright, the kind that didn't recline. I buckled in automatically but kept scanning the interior. Trying to keep my voice casual, I said, "You, take the seats out for something." She shrugged without looking at me. "I like the space," she said, as if that explained it. She pulled away from the curb quickly, merging into traffic without much warning. The engine roared, and the empty space behind us amplified every bump and rattle until it felt like we were driving inside a drum. For the first couple of minutes, the route made sense, heading toward the restaurant we'd agree on. But then we passed the exit that would have taken us there. "Shortcut?" I asked. "Better spot," she said, still looking straight ahead. The city lights thinned out fast. Streetlights stretched further apart, their glow barely touching the cracked asphalt between them. Buildings gave way to dark stretches of field, then clusters of trees. I glanced down at my phone in my lap, tilting it so she couldn't see the screen. My location dot was moving steadily away from the city center. I tried to think of normal explanations. Maybe she wanted to surprise me. Maybe it was some local diner she swore by. But the longer we drove, the more the air inside the van seemed to thicken, and the metallic smell in the cabin grew sharper. We passed a small gas station, its sign glowing green against the dark. I thought about asking her to stop so I could grab a drink, really just an excuse to step outside. But she didn't even slow down. The green light faded in the side mirror until it was gone. The road narrowed, no other cars, just us and the rattling of the van. I cleared my throat and said, "I think that place you mentioned might be closed by now." She didn't respond. The hum she'd been making earlier, almost like a quiet song, had stopped. I sat with my hands tight on my knees, legs braced against the floor. My mind started cataloging options. There was only one door on my side. The sliding door in the back could open from inside, maybe, if it wasn't locked. Then far ahead, I saw the faint glow of headlights coming toward us. My pulse jumped. One chance. I slipped my hand to the seatbelt latch, pressing it slowly so it wouldn't click loud enough for her to notice. I waited. We approached a sharp curve in the road, and she eased her foot off the gas. "I need to check something in my bag," I said, my voice shaky but trying to sound casual. Before she could answer, I yanked the handle and pushed the door open. Cold night air rushed in. I jumped. My feet hit gravel, and I stumbled hard, my knees scraping against the rough edge of the road. The oncoming car slowed, its headlights flooding over me. I waved both arms, yelling. The driver pulled over, rolled down their window. "I need a ride back to town," I blurted out, breathless. They didn't ask questions. I climbed in, slamming the door shut behind me. Only then did I look back. She was still there in the van, pulled over on the opposite side of the road. She hadn't gotten out. She hadn't shouted. She was just sitting in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, staring at us as we drove away. I never heard from her again, but for weeks afterward, I glanced at every white van I saw, just in case. It was going fine until the uniforms showed up. We were about halfway through dinner at this Italian place he picked, not the romantic, candlelit kind, more like the kind of restaurant that's just a little too busy for comfort. Tables crammed so close together you could hear the details of someone else's conversation whether you wanted to or not. Every time the waiter squeezed past with a tray, my chair nudged forward an inch. He'd been talking about his work in finance for a good 10 minutes straight. Not boring exactly, but very polished. Lots of phrases that sounded rehearsed, like he'd said them on 100 other dates. Every now and then, he'd toss in a little joke and glance at me for a reaction. I'd laugh when it seemed right to, twirl pasta around my fork, take a sip of my wine. It was noisy in that warm, restless way restaurants get on a Friday night. Clinking glasses, forks scraping against plates, the occasional burst of laughter from a corner table, which is probably why I didn't notice the officers at first. One second I was nodding along while he described some conference in Miami, and the next, there was a pause in the space around our table. Not in the whole restaurant, not yet, just right where we were sitting. 2 police officers had walked up, both tall, both broad-shouldered, wearing that professional, unreadable look that said they weren't here for a casual chat. The one closest to me looked straight at him and said a name. It wasn't his name. Not the one he'd told me on our date, not the one in my phone, not anything I'd ever heard. I froze mid-bite, pasta hanging from my fork. He didn't react at first. No surprise, no denial, just this stillness. Then, like it was a reflex, he set his fork down, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked up at them. Slowly. The air around us shifted instantly. Conversations at the surrounding tables dipped into a cautious quiet. You could feel people trying not to stare, but failing. The officer repeated the name, sharper this time. My date sighed, not like he was scared, more like he was annoyed about bad timing. He looked down at his plate for a moment, then back up. The second officer flipped open a small notepad and started reading. Dates, places. Phrases like felony warrant and armed robbery dropped into the air like heavy stones. I remember hearing a number, an amount of money, and feeling my stomach twist, because this wasn't something small. This wasn't a parking ticket or a fight at a bar. This was real. He still didn't argue, didn't try to convince me or them that it was a mistake. He just stood slowly, set his napkin neatly on the table like someone minding their manners, and let them cuff him right there. The metallic click of the handcuffs felt louder than it should have in all that noise. People nearby had stopped pretending not to watch. I saw a woman at the next table with her fork halfway to her mouth, completely frozen. Someone in the far corner had their phone tilted up in that obvious way that meant they were recording. The officers each took an arm and started walking in toward the door. Halfway there, he glanced back at me. Just for a second. His face was impossible to read. No apology, no anger, no fear. Just something I couldn't place. Then they were gone. The glass door swung shut behind them, and the restaurant sound slowly came back, like someone was turning the volume up. Plates clinked again. A waiter laughed at a joke in the corner. Everything resumed like nothing had just happened. I sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me. My pulse was so strong I could feel it in my throat. The waiter approached with that nervous half-smile people get when they don't know what to say. He asked if I wanted the rest of my meal boxed up. My brain scrambled for an answer and came up with something mumbled. He nodded, took my plate, and walked away. I don't remember paying. I know I left cash because the idea of waiting around for the check made me feel trapped. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the cold air hitting me harder than I expected. The street was just as busy as it had been when I got there, but I didn't see them anywhere. No officers know him. When I got home, I just sat on my couch with my coat still on, staring at the wall. The name they'd said kept looping in my head, over and over, like if I repeated it enough times, I'd understand why it sounded so heavy in their voices. Eventually, I grabbed my laptop, opened a browser, and typed it in. The search results loaded almost instantly. The very first link wasn't social media or a work profile. It was a mugshot on a most wanted list. Same face, same eyes, and disturbingly, the same shirt he'd been wearing at dinner. The list of charges underneath was worse than anything I'd imagined. Armed robbery, assault, something about a firearm. Dates going back years. There were locations in different states. It didn't look like someone who'd just made a mistake once. It looked like someone who had been running for a long time. I closed the laptop so hard it made a noise, then sat back, my hands gripping the armrests. My apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls were leaning in. For a while, I just listened. The hum of the fridge, the faint traffic outside. I kept catching myself glancing at the door, as if somehow he could show up here even though I knew he was in custody. At some point, I took my phone out, scrolled to his contact, and deleted it. Not that it mattered. The number he'd given me probably wouldn't work for long. But even after all that, I couldn't shake the image of him turning to look at me while they let him out. That single moment, his eyes locking with mine like there was something he wanted me to know. The truth is, I don't think I'll ever know what that was. The night started normal, painfully, disarmingly normal. We met for a drink at a quiet little bar near her place. It wasn't a dive, but it wasn't upscale either. Low amber lighting, worn leather booths, and a jukebox in the corner that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s. She was easy to talk to in that way that feels rare on a first meeting. She laughed with her whole face, asked questions that weren't just filler, and somehow managed to make even small talk sound like a private joke. By the end of the second round, my shoulders had loosened, the nervous edge dulled. She tilted her head slightly, studying me for a beat before asking, "Want to come back to mine? Hang out a bit longer." She mentioned she had a roommate, so I figured we'd be in a shared space. Maybe a couch, some music, another drink. Nothing about the way she said it set off alarms. Her building was a squat, older block tucked between two narrow streets. The kind with cracked concrete steps and an intercom system that looked like it would shock you if you touched it the wrong way. The hallway lights flickered with an almost rhythmic pattern, like the place was trying to build suspense on purpose. She unlocked her door, kicked off her shoes, and waved me in. The apartment was small but warmer than the hallway. A faint scent of vanilla candles hung in the air, clashing slightly with something sharper, maybe cleaning spray that hadn't fully faded. The place was cluttered, but not in a bad way. Stacks of books by the window, a blanket half draped over the couch, a coffee mug sitting abandoned on the counter. We settled in on the couch. She pulled up a playlist on her phone, letting soft, slow indie music hum in the background. We kept talking. Stories about weird coworkers, childhood pets, half-formed travel plans. I noticed she didn't bring up her roommate again, but I didn't press. It was maybe 40 minutes later, in the middle of her telling a story about an ex-boss with terrible breath, when the front door slammed open so hard it ricocheted off the wall. The sound was sharp, violent, the kind of noise that jolts something deep in your chest before your brain has even caught up. I jerked in my seat. She froze mid-sentence. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad, shoulders filling the frame. His hair was messy, jaw tight, and his eyes had that restless, barely contained chaos in them. In his right hand, gripped so tightly his knuckles were white, was a baseball bat. And not slung casually over his shoulder either. The bat's barrel was angled toward us, like a threat with weight behind it. For 2 or 3 seconds, my brain refused to process it. Maybe because she didn't introduce him, didn't even stand up right away. Maybe because in the movies, there's always a beat where you know exactly what's happening. This was messier, faster. Then the shouting started. At first, it was just noise, sharp, jagged syllables I couldn't catch. My pulse picked up, but I stayed seated, as if moving too quickly might trigger something worse. Then I caught a few words, enough to understand. He wasn't the roommate, he was her ex. And not the distant, we broke up years ago kind of ex. The kind whose voice cracked when he said her name. The kind who looked at her like every nerve in his body was wired to her existence. She finally stood, palms slightly raised. "It's fine, just," she started, but he cut her off, stepping forward. The bass handle shifted in his grip, the motion instinctual, like he'd swung it before. I could feel every muscle in my body coiling. I glanced at the door, calculating distance, angles, the weight of the coffee table between us. He noticed my eyes flick that way. And then he moved, just enough to block the path, his frame filling the space between me and the only exit. His attention darted between her and me, but his stance stayed planted, the bat still in view. The air felt denser now, like breathing took more effort. My ears picked up the tiniest sounds. The soft whir of the fridge in the kitchen, the creak of the floor under his shifting feet. She kept her voice low, urgent, trying to keep him tethered to her words. I don't remember exactly what she said, just the cadence, steady and careful, like talking down a wild animal. Then, for the smallest fraction of a second, his eyes locked entirely on her. That was my chance. I shifted sideways, moving around the coffee table, keeping it between us like a fragile shield. My foot caught on the edge of a rug, just enough to send a jolt through my balance, but I recovered without making it obvious. The door was 3 steps away. 2. My hand found the lock, turned it quietly, and then I was out, pulling it shut behind me with just enough force to feel final. The hallway felt like another world, same flickering lights, same peeling paint, but now it was freedom. I moved fast at first, then faster, until my walk became a sprint toward the stairs. My breath echoed in the stairwell, bouncing off concrete walls. I didn't stop moving until I hit the street. The night air bit my skin, each breath sharp enough to sting. I glanced back once, but the building's doorway stayed empty. I crossed to the other side of the street, putting distance between us, then pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled as I ordered a rideshare, my eyes darting to every shadow until headlights finally rolled up to the curb. The driver didn't ask why I was out of breath, didn't comment on my twitchy glances at the rearview mirror. I was grateful for the silence. The ride home blurred into a loop in my head, the door slam, the look in his eyes, the way she'd stayed so calm. Too calm, like this wasn't the first time he'd stormed into her life like that. Back in my apartment, I dropped onto the couch without taking off my coat. My phone was still in my hand. I pulled up her contact and stared at the name for a long minute before hitting block. No second thoughts, no messages. And now whenever someone on a first date casually mentions having a roommate, I can't help it. I wonder what the real story is. The date had been fine. Not amazing, not a disaster. Just one of those middle-of-the-road first meetings where you're never quite sure if there's enough spark to make it worth a second. We'd met for coffee first, one of those small cafes with chopboard menus and indie music that's just loud enough to make you raise your voice. He talked a lot about himself. Not in an obnoxious way, but in that steady stream of consciousness style where you barely have to say anything to keep the conversation going. Honestly, I didn't mind. It meant there were no awkward silences, and I could just nod along while sipping my latte. I figured I'd make an excuse after an hour, head home, and chalk it up as an average afternoon. But then, as we were walking down the street afterward, he asked if I wanted to see the project he'd been working on at his place. The way he said project made it sound harmless, maybe a hobby, something creative. A painting he was working on or a model car collection. I hesitated. It was still early in the day, and his place, he assured me, was just a short drive away. I told myself I'd only stay for a few minutes. From the outside, the house looked normal. A modest two-story on a quiet street, the kind of place you'd barely notice driving past. The front yard was plain, no flowers, no lawn ornaments, just a stretch of short grass and a cracked path leading to the door. Inside, though, something felt off. The living room was almost empty. A couch shoved against one wall, a small coffee table, and nothing else. No framed photos. No art. Not even a rug to make the space feel lived in. It was the kind of minimalism that didn't seem intentional, more like someone had just moved in or was about to move out. We walked through to the kitchen, and that's when I noticed it. In the far corner, there was a door. A heavy wooden door, darker than the rest of the trim, with a large metal padlock hanging from the latch. Inside a house, not on a shed outside. Inside. He noticed me looking and grinned. "That's where my project is," he said. Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a massive ring of keys. There had to be 30 of them, all different sizes and shapes, clinking together with a sharp metallic sound that made my stomach tighten. I tried to laugh it off, asked what exactly was behind the door. He didn't answer directly. Just said, "You'll see," in this light, sing-song tone that didn't match the way my skin prickled. He crouched in front of the door and started trying keys one by one, humming softly to himself between attempts. The kitchen suddenly felt colder, though I couldn't tell if it was actually the air or just me becoming more aware of my surroundings. I glanced over my shoulder toward the front door. From where I was standing, it looked far away, farther than it had when we walked in. On the 5th try, he found the right key. The padlock popped open with a dull metallic click. He let it hang from the latch and slowly opened the door. There was no light switch, just a steep wooden staircase leading down into darkness so deep it felt solid. The smell that drifted up was damp, like old concrete that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Underneath that was something sharper, faintly metallic. He stepped aside and gestured for me to go first. I stayed exactly where I was. My pulse was loud in my ears now, my body frozen between politeness and a gut-deep warning to get out. I forced a smile and said I wasn't sure about going into a dark basement on a first date. I tried to make it sound like a joke. He tilted his head slightly, like I'd spoken in another language. The silence between us stretched. Then, without a word, he stepped onto the stairs himself. The wood groaned under his weight. He descended slowly, each step deliberate. Halfway down, he stopped, turned to look up at me, and smiled again. "You should come see," he said, his voice echoing faintly. Something about the way he said it, casual like this was all normal, made the back of my neck go cold. I shook my head, said I really should get going. That's when his smile faded, just a fraction. Not into anger, but into something sharper, focused. I took a small step back toward the kitchen doorway. He stayed where he was, halfway between the light upstairs and whatever was down there in the dark. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me. I could stand there and wait for him to come back up, or I could leave right then. My decision made itself. I should get home, I muttered, moving toward the front door. My hands were already in my pockets, curling around my keys and phone. He didn't follow right away. I was halfway across the living room when I heard it. The sound of the basement door swinging shut. Then the metallic clink of the padlock clicking closed again. By the time I had my shoes on, he was standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame. The ring of keys dangled from his hand, the metal glinting in the dim light. He didn't try to stop me, didn't say goodbye, just watched as I opened the door and stepped outside. I didn't look back until I was in my car, the engine running. He was still standing there in the doorway, just a dark silhouette now, but I could see the faint shine of the keys moving slightly in his hand. I drove straight home, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. When I got inside, I locked my door, then locked it again, just to be sure. I sat on my couch in the dim light, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me. I could still see that open basement door in my mind, the darkness beyond it swallowing the light. I never asked what his project was, and I am certain with every fiber of me that I don't want to know. From the first 15 minutes, I already knew I wasn't feeling it. She was fine on paper, nice enough, pleasant conversation, seemed like someone who could be easy to spend time with. But there was this edge to her, something I couldn't quite put into words. The questions she asked didn't feel like casual curiosity. They felt like probes, like she was scanning for weaknesses or secrets. I kept trying to steer things toward lighter topics, hobbies, travel, favorite movies. But somehow, no matter what I said, she looped it back to something personal. We were at a mid-range steakhouse downtown. You know the type. Heavy wooden tables that are just a little too big for two people, fog candlelight flickering in tiny glass holders, a soft hum of music beneath the chatter of other diners. It's the kind of place designed to feel cozy and intimate, but right now I felt trapped. We ordered our meals. I tried to focus on my food, chewing slowly, letting the conversation fill the gaps in the silence without much thought. She was talking about her job, her family, her past relationships, all in a tone that was casual, but I couldn't shake the feeling she was testing me. It was exhausting. Halfway through the meal, I decided to be honest. I didn't want to ghost her. I figured it'd be better to let her know up front rather than dragging it out and making it awkward. I waited until the plates were mostly cleared, took a careful sip of my drink, and then told her politely that I didn't think we'd be going on a second date. Her reaction was nothing at first. No gasp, no angry words, no pleading. Just stillness. She stared at me, unblinking for a few seconds longer than felt normal, like she was measuring me. My chest tightened. Then she reached over to the empty plate beside her. I didn't pay much attention at first, assuming she was just moving something aside. But she picked up the steak knife. Slowly, deliberately. The motion was casual, too casual, like it had nothing to do with what I'd just said. And then she slammed it down. The metal hit the wood with a deep, resonant thunk. I froze. My brain didn't even register the knife first. I just looked at her. The blade landed maybe an inch from my fingers, the vibration from the impact traveling through the table into my hand. My heart jumped into my throat. She was smiling now, just a small curve of her lips, the kind of smile that makes your stomach drop. Not sweet, not friendly, but daring, almost taunting. It was clear she wanted me to notice, to feel the jolt of that near miss. The restaurant seemed to shrink in that moment. The clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversations faded into the background. For a split second, it felt like the room had gone completely silent, all sound absorbed by the intensity of her gaze and that single chilling action. I didn't move. I didn't want to flinch. I forced my hands to stay still on the table, though I could feel my fingers trembling. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I realized I was holding my breath. I looked down at the blade, then back at her, trying to figure out the safest way to get out of this without escalating anything. She pulled the knife back out of the table, scraping the wood faintly as she did, and set it down next to her plate like it had been a casual gesture the whole time, like nothing had happened. The rest of dinner was silence. I couldn't continue the conversation after that. Words felt meaningless. I signaled the waiter for the check and paid for both of us, faster than I normally would, just to speed things along. She didn't protest. She sat there quietly, watching me, still with that same small, unnerving smile. When we stood to leave, she was right behind me as we walked toward the door. I could feel her presence, close enough that I had to consciously keep my pace steady to maintain some distance. Every step felt heavy, like walking through a fog of tension. Outside, she didn't say goodbye. She didn't turn to wave, didn't even glance back at me. She just walked in the opposite direction, disappearing into the night. I didn't watch her go. I got to my car as quickly as possible, careful not to look panicked, but wanting nothing more than to be inside and locked away from that experience. Once I was seated behind the wheel, I sat there for a long moment, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. I could still feel the hum of the table through my palms, a phantom vibration of metal against wood. That faint mark where the knife had landed, so close, so deliberate, burned into my memory. I didn't message her afterward. I didn't try to explain myself. I didn't even think about whether she might call me. And I didn't go back to that restaurant for a long, long time. Because now every time I sit at a table with a steak knife in front of me, someone I don't know well, a casual dinner, a new date, my mind flashes back. I see the motion, the angle, the sound. I feel the shock, the rush of air, the heartbeat-thumping terror of being reminded that a polite conversation can instantly tip into something unpredictable. It's not just the knife. It's the sudden, impossible shift in tone, the moment when someone's normal facade fractures and reveals something sharp and dangerous underneath. I can still feel it sometimes weeks later when I reach for my drink or set my hand near the edge of a table. That one simple, horrifying gesture has become this mental mark. I remind myself I was lucky, that it didn't escalate, that I walk out alive, intact. But the memory lingers. It's in the way I notice the spacing of tables, the angle of chairs, the position of knives. It's in the way I hesitate before leaning forward to take a bite of my meal, my brain replaying that thunk, the vibration, her smile. It changed how I see the world in the smallest moments. How quickly something normal, a date, a meal, a simple conversation, can turn into a moment of danger. And how sometimes all it takes is one sharp piece of metal and one unnervingly calm smile to remind you just how close danger can get without warning. I didn't date her again. I blocked her number and I avoided that part of town for a while. But the memory of that night, of that small, casual, yet terrifying gesture, will always be with me. A reminder that the polite conversation we think is safe can be deceiving. That people can hide edges behind smiles, and that sometimes the most innocent setting can become the most unnerving. Even now, months later, I notice the tables when I walk into a restaurant. I know the knives. I imagine that slow, deliberate slap onto wood. My pulse quickens, and I'm reminded that what seems safe can shift in a heartbeat. That moment is burned into me, a lesson in caution, in awareness, and in the terrifying unpredictability of people. I knew about 15 minutes in that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't that he'd done anything massively wrong. He wasn't rude, didn't say anything inappropriate. It was more of a gut thing, the kind of feeling that gnaws at the back of your mind. The conversation felt forced, like I was filling gaps that didn't really need filling. Every laugh felt slightly off, every question slightly calculated. And the way he stared at me, it wasn't casual interest. It wasn't curiosity in the ordinary sense. It was more like he was studying me, trying to figure something out, like I was a puzzle he needed to solve. We met at this little bar on the corner. One of those places with exposed brick walls, dim lighting, and a faint smell of old wood and spilled beer. It was busy enough that you could get lost in the hum of conversations, clinking glasses, and muted music, which I liked. It gave a sense of anonymity. I ordered a drink, nursed it slowly, and smiled politely while trying to hide how off-putting I found him. By the time the second round came and went, I decided I'd end it early. When I told him I needed to head out, he didn't protest. He even smiled, leaning back slightly, arms crossed in that everything's fine way, and said it was okay. He asked if I'd text him, and I said sure, even though I knew I wouldn't. I slipped on my coat, zipped it up, and stepped outside. The air hit me cold, sharp and biting, the kind that makes your lungs sting if you breathe too deeply. My breath fogged in little clouds, and the street lamps cast the night in a soft, hazy glow. The distant murmur of the bar faded as I turned the corner, the quiet of the street settling around me. That's when I noticed footsteps behind me. At first, I told myself it was just someone leaving the bar, maybe a couple or another person walking their dog. The steps matched my pace for a while, a few paces back. I didn't turn around. I forced myself to keep walking, telling myself not to overthink it. Then I caught a reflection in a shop window, and my stomach sank. It was him. Same coat, same haircut, same expression I've been trying to ignore all night. He was walking right behind me. Not close enough to bump into me, but close enough that the way he matched my steps was intentional. My mind raced. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he had somewhere to go in the same direction, but it didn't feel that way. I slowed slightly, hoping he would pass, but he slowed too, keeping the same distance. I sped up. So did he. The sound of his shoes hitting the pavement felt sharper now in the quiet of the street. The rhythm, a steady, deliberate echo, set my nerves on edge. I told myself to stay calm, to think rationally. The bus stop was still a few blocks away, a familiar route I'd walked a dozen times. My hands were in my pockets, fingers wrapped tight around my phone, debating whether to call someone. My heart thumped hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Then it changed. The steps behind me quickened, way too quick. I glanced over my shoulder and froze. His head was down, shoulders hunched forward, sprinting straight at me. There was no hesitation, no warning, just forward motion. I bolted. I didn't think, I just ran. Cold air burned my lungs, my boots slapped hard against the wet pavement, and my coat flapped behind me. My heartbeat pounded so violently it was all I could hear, the thrum almost drowning out the sound of his pursuit. His steps were close now, unmistakably his, matching mine with terrifying precision. I could hear the quick intake of his breath behind me, feel the rhythm of his stride echoing mine. I cut down a side street without looking, nearly slipping on a patch of wet leaves. My mind raced. Should I scream? Should I run faster? I pushed the thoughts aside and just ran, arms pumping, head down, heart hammering so hard it was a drumbeat against my ribs. Up ahead, I saw a lit storefront. Inside, a man was sweeping, moving slowly, unaware of the drama unfolding outside. I flung the door open so hard that the bell above it clanged, sharp and piercing in the quiet street. The man behind the counter looked up, startled as I stumbled inside, panting and shivering. I didn't have to explain much. One look at my face, my heaving breaths, the way I kept glancing at the door, it was enough. Without a word, the man stepped forward and locked the door. Through the glass, I could see him. He had stopped across the street, not running anymore, just standing there, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on me. I held my breath. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I waited inside until the man offered to walk me to a cab. I accepted without hesitation, sticking close to his side, grateful for the warmth of human presence. I didn't see him again that night. When I got home, I paced for a while, retracing the sequence over and over in my mind. How calm he had seemed at the bar. How he had smiled when I said I was leaving. How in the space of a few blocks, everything had shifted and a normal, harmless evening had turned into something terrifying. I blocked his number before I even took my coat off. And now I don't walk to the bus stop alone after a date. I pay attention to every reflection, every shadow. I've developed this hyper-awareness that I hate, this constant calculation of who might be behind me, what could happen if I let my guard down. I know it's paranoid, but the night I experienced taught me how quickly normalcy can fracture, how quickly someone can go from polite to threatening. Every time I step outside, I remember that sprint. The pounding of boots on pavement, the cold air stinging my lungs, the fear that ran through me so sharply it felt physical, like it had left bruises inside my chest. That night left a mark, a permanent reminder that gut instincts matter, that the polite smile across a table can mask something dangerous, and that sometimes the safest move is to leave early and never look back. I didn't think much of it when she offered to drive. It was our first date, and she said she knew a good spot for dinner. I assumed it was just a friendly gesture, a way to make things simple. She pulled up outside my place in this spotless black SUV, the kind of car that gleams even under the dull glow of streetlights. The windows were tinted just enough that I couldn't really see inside until she rolled one down. She smiled, waved me in, and I got in the passenger seat, feeling a little more at ease. For the first few minutes, it was normal. Small talk about traffic, the weather, how our days had gone. The kind of conversation you have when you're both trying to fill the air before really knowing each other. She was calm, a little quiet, and I didn't think much of it. The hum of the engine and the faint low music gave the ride a relaxed feeling. Then, as we hit the main road, I reached to adjust the window. It wouldn't budge. I tried the handle again to see if it was stuck. It wasn't. That's when I noticed the faint click she'd made just after we pulled away from my place. I didn't register it at the time, but now it made sense. The child lock. I tried to make a joke about it. Guess I'm trapped, I said lightly. She didn't answer. She kept her eyes straight ahead, hands tight on the wheel, shoulders tense, like she was focusing way too hard for someone just heading to dinner. I asked where the restaurant was. She said it wasn't far. We drove past where I thought we'd turn, then past another intersection. The city slowly started to fall away. Fewer streetlights, fewer buildings. I glanced out the window and saw stretches of empty lots, closed warehouses, the kind of place that looks abandoned even in the middle of the day. I tried asking again where we were going, but she either didn't hear me or didn't want to answer. The more I looked at her, the more I noticed her face had changed. That friendly, easy smile she'd had when she pulled up was gone. Her jaw was set, and her lips were tight. She tapped her thumb against the steering wheel in a steady rhythm, the only movement in an otherwise frozen posture. I thought about trying the door, but with a child lock on, it wouldn't matter unless we stopped. I checked my phone. Signal was fine. I slid it into my lap, hidden under my jacket, and opened the Maps app. The blue dot showed us moving steadily farther from town. Every turn, every street, it was like we were going deeper into some place that didn't exist on any map I knew. The road narrowed, no other cars, no sidewalks. just long stretches of gravel, overgrown grass on either side, and the occasional crumbling fence post leaning into the darkness. The headlights cut through a narrow cone of black, illuminating only a few feet ahead. Beyond that, it was shadow, empty, and unfamiliar. I asked again if we were still going to dinner. No answer. She didn't even blink. The silence settled over the car like a weight. I tried to focus on my breathing and keeping calm, but every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. I started looking for landmarks. Anything I could recognize in case I needed to retrace my way back. There was nothing. Only darkness, the narrow road stretching forward, and the faint, rhythmic tapping of her thumb on the wheel. Finally, the road narrowed even further, almost like a dirt track now. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scratching against the car as if trying to push it back. My stomach tightened, knots forming that I couldn't loosen. I could feel sweat beginning to bead at my hairline, my hands growing clammy despite the chill of the night. She pulled into a clearing. No lights, no buildings, only a wide patch of dirt surrounded by trees that blocked out the sky. She put the car in park but didn't turn it off. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I didn't know whether I should speak, stay silent, or prepare to run. My heart thumped so loud I thought she could hear it. She finally turned her head and looked at me. There was no expression, no anger, no amusement, no recognition, just a blank stare that seemed to measure me like I was some unknown variable. My phone was still in my pocket. I had barely dared to breathe while watching her. Then, without a word, she reached over, unlocked the door, and said we should head back, like nothing had happened. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the hours I'd spent silently panicking in the passenger seat. The drive back was even more surreal. The roads felt longer now, every turn winding deeper into memory. She didn't speak. I didn't speak. I just sat, stiff and tense, gripping the seat, listening to the hum of the engine, waiting for the familiar lights of town to appear. Finally, we emerged back onto the main roads. Streetlights flickered on either side. I could see cars again. People. Normalcy. My muscles unclenched slightly, though my chest was still tight. She pulled up outside my place, put the car in park, and leaned back in the seat. I muttered something about having a good night and got out as fast as I could without looking like I was in a hurry. I didn't look back when I shut the door. I just walked straight to my building, not stopping until the door was locked behind me. That night, I blocked her number. I deleted the contact. I avoided thinking about it for a while, but the memory stuck, every detail etched into my mind. The way the child lock click sounded when we left, the endless stretches of darkness, the quiet intensity of her stare. And now, every time someone offers to drive on a first date, I check the locks before we even pull away. I check the child locks, the door handles, the windows. I make sure I know exactly where I am and how to get back. I've learned that sometimes the simplest gestures, a ride, a smile, a quiet drive, can carry hidden danger, and that paying attention to instinct isn't just precaution, it's survival. I was already sitting at the table when he walked in. He was 20 minutes late, which wasn't a huge deal, but I'd been glancing at the door so often that I'm sure the waiter had noticed. Every time it swung open, I hoped it would be him. And every time it wasn't, my stomach sank a little further. When I finally saw him come through, he looked slightly out of breath, running a hand through his hair like he'd been rushing across town. There was a quick, nervous energy about him, the kind that makes you wonder if they're flustered or hiding something. He gave me a brief smile and came in for a hug. It was one of those quick, slightly awkward first date hugs, the kind where you're not entirely sure what to do with your arms. But as soon as my arm brushed against his sleeve, I noticed it. Small, dark red spots. Not a lot, but enough to catch the eye up close. The fabric of his light gray shirt made them stand out starkly. It wasn't wine, wasn't ketchup, wasn't sauce from a sloppy lunch. It looked like fresh blood. He pulled back before I could say anything, sat down, and mumbled something about work being crazy. He picked up the menu like nothing was wrong. I stared at it for a moment, trying to focus on the list of dishes, but my eyes kept flicking back to that sleeve. The spots weren't big, but they were uneven, like they'd landed there from a spray or a flick. The kind of stains you see in movies when someone's been too close to something bad, something violent. Part of me wanted to ask about it. The other part, the latter part, didn't want to hear the answer. I nodded along as he spoke about his job, something about late calls, a client being difficult, emails piling up. He spoke fast, almost like he wanted to get everything out before I could notice the stains again. But the more he talked, the more I couldn't shake the image of those dark red droplets. A faint smudge in the cuff, a darker marking of the seam, that weren't old stains. The edges still caught the light when he moved his arm, the way wetness does before it dries. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the sound of his voice, but the mental images were stubborn. The restaurant was busy, but it felt like we were in a bubble. People laughed and chatted around us, plates clinking, waiters bustling, the hum of conversation mixing with music playing somewhere overhead, but I could barely hear any of it. All I could notice was the sleeve, the subtle twitch of his fingers as he adjusted his napkin, and the way he kept his arm angled slightly away from the other diners. Halfway through the meal, he excused himself to take a call. As he stood, I realized he kept his left arm, the one with the stains, slightly turned inward away from anyone nearby, almost like he didn't want anyone else to see. I watched him move toward the door. His posture was rigid, his phone held at an odd angle, his movements calculated, controlled. He stepped outside and stood there for a moment, back to the glass, hand in his pocket, the other holding the phone but barely moving it. When he came back, the easy smile from earlier had vanished. He picked up his fork as though nothing had happened and asked about my weekend plans. I gave vague answers, nodding and smiling. All my mind raced. What could have happened before he got here? An accident? A fight? Something worse? Every possibility made my stomach tighten further. By the time we finished eating, I'd already decided there wouldn't be a second date. He offered to walk me to my car, and I accepted. Refusing would have made him suspicious, or at least made the night even more awkward. The night air was colder than I remembered, biting through my coat. The streets were quieter than they had been when I arrived, almost unnaturally so. We stopped next to my car. He leaned casually against the hood like he wasn't in a hurry to leave. That's when I noticed something else. His sleeve had been rolled up slightly higher, covering part of the stains. But there was still one dark spot visible near his elbow, small but undeniable. He gave me a long look, one that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. Then he said he'd text me later. I smiled, nodded, and unlocked my car. I got in quickly, trying not to seem like I was in a rush. He stayed there, just watching me start the engine, hands in his pockets, standing like a shadow in the dim lot light. When I pulled out, I checked the mirror. He hadn't moved. He was still there, staring until the brake lights in my car disappeared into the night. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel a little too tightly, replaying every moment in my head. Every droplet on that sleeve, every tense movement, every silent, unreadable expression. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The stains catching the light, the way he had angled his arm, the blank look he gave me. I thought about asking him, about confronting him, but I knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Some things are better left unknown. The next morning, I blocked his number. No explanation, no follow-up. Just a clean, quiet severing of the connection. Even now, months later, the memory lingers. Whenever I see someone with fresh stains on their clothes, it doesn't matter the color, the size, or the source, I feel that same cold knot in my stomach. That sense of unease, the prickling of awareness that something about appearances can be deceiving. It's a small thing, a fleeting detail, but it sticks, a warning I can't shake. And that's what I carry with me now, that quiet, persistent awareness. The way a single glance, a single detail, can make an ordinary night impossible to forget. I didn't notice anything strange about her at first. We'd met at this small pizza place in the middle of town, the kind with cramped booths and a warm, slightly sticky floor from decades of spilled drinks. The lighting was uneven. Dusty ceiling lamps cast pools of soft light, while neon signs flickered in corners, giving everything a faint red and blue glow. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner with a drink, waving me over like she'd been waiting a while. When I slid into the booth across from her, she smiled, a little too perfectly, but it didn't feel off at the time. The date started normally enough. We ordered a pizza to share and talked about music, work, random little things that are supposed to fill a first date conversation. She laughed a lot, almost too much, as if she was trying to punctuate every moment. There was something about her eye contact, though, that I didn't notice at first. It didn't break often. Even when she took a sip of her drink, her eyes stayed locked on mine. I figured maybe she was just confident or trying to be flirty. That thought made me smile a little. It seemed like a good sign. About halfway through, I excused myself to use the bathroom. It's one of those single-person stalls at the back of the restaurant, near the kitchen doors. I didn't notice her stand up as I walked past the bar. I pushed open the bathroom door and locked it behind me. The tile was cold under my shoes, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen mixing with the distant clatter of dishes. I was in there maybe a minute when I thought I heard something faint outside. Not loud, just a subtle scrape or shuffle. The kind of noise you hear if someone shifted their weight from one foot to the other. I paused mid-step, trying to convince myself it was just another patron, maybe waiting to use the restroom. I finished quickly, unlocked the door, pushed it open, expecting to step back into the hallway. But she was there, right in front of me. Not leaning against the wall, not pretending to check her phone, not at a casual distance. She was standing directly in front of the door, close enough that if I'd taken a step forward, we would have bumped into each other. No smile, no expression, just staring. I froze mid-step, unsure what to do. She didn't say a word. Didn't step aside immediately. It wasn't until I sort of shuffled sideways that she shifted just enough to let me pass. All the while, her eyes never left mine. There was a strange, calculated stillness to her, a quiet intensity that made my stomach knot. I walked back to the table, trying to act like nothing had happened. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, maybe she had to check on something or was coming to get me. But my brain refused to let it go. Did she follow me in there? How long had she been standing like that? Would she been there the whole time, silently watching? When we sat back down, she acted completely normal. Asked if I wanted another drink, made a comment about the music, competing like nothing had happened. I nodded along, trying to appear calm, but my body was tense. Every few seconds, I glanced up, and sure enough, she was already looking at me. Not casual, friendly eye contact. This was different. It was unwavering, almost predatory. The pizza, which had seemed light and delicious moments before, suddenly felt heavy in my stomach. Each bite made me more aware of the previous moment in the hallway, how quiet she'd been, how long she could have stayed if I had taken another minute inside. The thought made me swallow hard, forcing down my unease with a gulp of soda. After a few minutes of forced small talk, I decided I didn't want to drag the night out. I told her I had to get up early the next morning. She didn't argue, didn't seem disappointed. She just nodded slowly, still staring, as if trying to memorize every detail of my face. I wanted to laugh it off to say I was just being paranoid, but the feeling in my chest said otherwise. When we walked outside, the air was cool, the kind that made your cheeks tingle and your hands instinctively brush over your arms. I felt warm from tension, like I had been carrying it for hours. I said goodnight quickly and started toward my car. She didn't walk in the same direction as me, but when I glanced back, she was still standing by the restaurant door, watching. Not just watching casually, watching in that same unblinking, unreadable way. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, trying to shake the feeling. The whole encounter had been so subtle, so quiet, yet it pressed down on me like a physical weight. She hadn't said anything threatening. She hadn't followed me into the parking lot. But the way she had been standing inside the hallway, so close, so silent, had left an imprint on my mind. When I finally started the engine and drove home, my stomach was tied in knots. Every mirror I passed made me glance briefly, half expecting to see her car following me, headlights looming in the distance. It never happened, but the tension didn't leave. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there, waiting, silent and still. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness of my bedroom, unblinking, memorizing. I kept replaying that moment over and over, trying to rationalize it, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the feeling stayed. And now, every time I'm on a date and need to excuse myself to the bathroom, I glance over my shoulder. Just once, just to make sure no one is following me down the hall. The memory is small, a single detail, but it lingers like a shadow. A reminder that sometimes people's behavior can be so subtle yet so unnerving that it changes the way you look at the world. Even something as ordinary as going to the bathroom during a first date. I should have just gone home after the coffee. That was the plan. Me for a quick drink, see how it went, maybe grab lunch if things felt right. But he kept making the conversation easy, asking about my job, my family, my dog. There was nothing pushy, nothing awkward, just a gentle, constant stream of questions that made me feel at ease. So when he suggested we hang out at his place for a bit, I said yes, telling myself it would be harmless. It was only a 10-minute drive. His place was in one of those quiet neighborhoods where every house looked like it was built in the same week. Small lawns, narrow driveways, fences that didn't quite match, a sort of uniform suburban monotony. The outside of his house didn't look bad at first glance. A little overgrown here and there, weeds creeping up the walkway, paint slightly chipped on the siding, but nothing alarming. The door opened smoothly when he used his key, and the inside was clean, almost unnervingly so, but it was weirdly bare. There were no photos, no personal decorations, nothing that gave me a sense of who he was. Just a couch, a low table, and a big TV. The walls were pale beige, which made the entire place feel colder than it actually was. He put on some music, slow, soft, not loud enough to mask anything else, and offered me a drink. I accepted, thinking the atmosphere was just his style. A few minutes later, I told him I needed the bathroom. He pointed down the hall, second door on the left, and I walked toward it, trying not to make it obvious how uneasy I already felt. The bathroom was small, barely enough room for me to turn around comfortably, but the first thing I noticed wasn't the size. It was the window, or more specifically, the thick metal bars covering it from the inside. Rusted and solid, bolted straight into the frame. I froze for a moment, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a security measure. Some people in rougher areas do that, right? But as I leaned closer, I noticed the same style of bars on the small frosted window in the hallway outside. My stomach started tightening, a slow coil of unease that I couldn't shake. I finished quickly, my hands trembling slightly as I washed them and stepped back into the hall. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the music from the living room. I found myself walking toward the front door almost instinctively, curiosity mixing with fear. The metal bars on every window I could see, the small, unnervingly quiet space. It all pressed down on me like a weight. The door had a heavy padlock. Not the kind you see on a shed or a bike chain, but an actual thick steel lock latched through a bracket bolted into the wall next to the frame. My chest went tight. I could have sworn it hadn't been there when we came in. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to reason it away. Maybe he was just careful, maybe he locked it after we came in without thinking. But it didn't explain why every window I could see had bars all the way down the hallway. Every instinct in my body was screaming that something wasn't right. I didn't hear him approach until he was right behind me. He appeared in the hallway carrying 2 drinks, smiling like everything was perfectly normal. My body jumped slightly, and I stepped away from the door, pretending to inspect something on the wall. He handed me my glass and sat down on the couch, patting the cushion beside him, a casual, friendly gesture. I sat, but my brain was scanning the room in a loop. Anything I could use if things went wrong. The low table was glass, useless. The couch cushions were too light. A heavy metal lamp in the corner caught my eye, but it felt like too much effort to move it in time if I needed it. Every glance toward the door, every flicker of movement, my eyes darted to the padlock like it was a live wire, ready to shock me if I ignored it. We made small talk for a few more minutes, but I wasn't really listening. I was counting exits, measuring distances, imagining the scenarios that could play out in a house that already felt like a trap. Each corner seemed suspicious. Each silence in the music stretched longer than it should. Eventually, I told him I needed to feed my dog. His reaction made my stomach twist. He hesitated just a fraction of a second, then nodded. But he didn't move to unlock the door right away. Instead, he lingered, finishing his drink carefully, setting it down with deliberate precision, and then strolling toward the door as if nothing was amiss. The sound of the padlock clicking open felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. The cold night air rushed in, brushing against my skin and chilling me in a way the house never had. I stepped through the doorway, thanking him quietly for the drink, my voice steadier than I felt. I didn't stop until I was on the street, moving toward my car without looking back. I made it inside and locked the doors, sitting there for a moment, shaking uncontrollably. It took 2 tries just to get the key into the ignition. My hands were trembling as if I'd run a marathon I didn't know I'd started. On the drive home, my mind replayed the night over and over. The quiet of the street, the drawn blinds, the bars on the windows. They hadn't just looked like security measures. They looked like they were meant to keep something in, or maybe keep someone out. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined if I hadn't gone to the bathroom, I might not have noticed it all until it was too late. Even now, thinking back, the memory is sharp. The calmness of his smile, the casual way he offered me a drink, the deliberate motion of unlocking the padlock. Everything was normal on the surface, but the smallest details, The bars, the silence, the way he lingered, told a completely different story. I realized then how small actions, almost invisible on a first glance, can carry hidden warning signs. How quickly a place can feel like a trap without anyone ever raising their voice. And I promised myself I'd never ignore that knot in my stomach again. I thought she was just being quirky at first. We'd met for dinner at this small, kind of old school diner just outside of town. The kind with neon signs that flicker a little, red vinyl booths that squeak when you slide in, and formica tables scratched from years of use. It had that slightly greasy smell that somehow always smells comforting late in the afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a drink, looking like she'd scoped out the best seat in the place. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she had this sharp sense of humor that hit before you even realized it. The type that makes you think she spent a lot of time people watching, cataloging little details about strangers, turning them into stories in her head. We started off casually enough, joking about bad dates, awkward first impressions, and the kind of ridiculous things people do when they're trying to impress someone. The conversation flowed easily, almost too easily. I remember thinking how rare that was, how nice it was to not stumble over small talk or feel pressured to impress. Halfway through, I made some dumb joke about how she probably had an escape plan in case the date went sideways. She laughed, leaned back, then reached down toward her boot. I assumed she was going to pull out her phone or something to play along. Maybe a small gag, a card trick, a candy bar. Something harmless. Instead, she came up holding a gun. It wasn't some tiny flimsy thing. Matte black, heavy looking, like it belonged in a police holster rather than a purse. She spun it once in her hand with a casual confidence that made my stomach flip, then laid it on the table between us with a smirk. Just in case the date went bad, she said, in a tone that was light, almost playful. I froze mid-sentence. My brain couldn't decide if this was a joke or serious. The way she said it, you might have laughed along if you didn't notice the weight of the metal, the realistic click of the cylinder. But it was real. And it was there. I expected her to laugh and put it away immediately. She didn't. She kept it there, resting next to her water glass, like it belonged among the napkin holder and the ketchup bottles. Every so often, she'd tap her fingers against the grip while talking about something totally unrelated. A past job, a weird neighbor, a favorite song. And every time, my eyes involuntarily flicked back to it. The air in the booth felt heavier, tighter, as if the gun itself was drawing it out of the room. I tried to keep the conversation going, acting like nothing was wrong, but my mind kept running scenarios. What if she accidentally dropped it? What if she got startled? Even in a casual context, the presence of that gun made everything else feel tenuous. When the waitress came over to refill our drinks, her eyes lingered on the gun for half a second before she looked up at us. I gave her an awkward smile like everything was fine, and the waitress moved on quicker than usual. I could feel her glance from the corner of my eye, the unspoken recognition of something out of place. We finished eating, and I hoped that when we got up, she'd tuck it back into her boot. I thought maybe it was just a show or weird form of dating humor, and she'd let it go. Nope. She stood, slipped it into the side pocket of her jacket, and suggested we go for a walk. My stomach tightened, but I figured being in public, moving through open spaces, would be better than sitting in a booth with her and that gun. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the streets. Shops were closing, neon signs flickering to life, the streets quiet and liminal, like a pause between the bustle of the day and the stirrings of the night. We walked side by side, making small talk, old jobs, weird neighbors, music she hated. Normal conversation, except every time she adjusted her jacket, I caught sight of the handle sticking out. My thoughts kept circling back to it, the simplicity of drawing it, the reality of what it could do in a fraction of a second. We stopped near a small park, one of those almost forgotten green spaces with cracked benches and overgrown grass. She leaned back, stretching her legs, and rested one hand on the pocket where the gun was. Not gripping it, just resting. Like she wasn't aware of how unnerving it looked. I couldn't even tell if she was joking or if this was her casual manner of carrying it. A couple walked past with their dog, and I noticed the guy glanced down at her jacket. His pace quickened. The dog started barking at us, and she laughed, joking that it must be able to smell fear. I forced a weak laugh, pretending it was a normal observation, but my mind raced, thinking about the options, the exits, the way the world felt suddenly precarious. Eventually, I told her I had an early morning and should probably head home. She didn't argue. She offered to walk me to my car, and I couldn't say no without making it obvious I wanted distance. Every step felt longer than it should. Every turn of her head toward me weighed heavily. I forced my tone casual, like this was an ordinary date ending. When we got to my car, she leaned on the doorframe, the handle of the gun still visible in her jacket pocket. She gave me a look I couldn't read, not angry, not happy, not playful. Just there. And then she told me she'd had fun. I unlocked my car, got in, and started the engine slowly. She stepped back, waved lightly, and walked off without looking back. I sat there for a while, the seatbelt digging into my chest as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. I replayed the night endlessly in my head, questioning whether it had been some strange attempt at flirting or if she had been serious the entire time. Either way, I knew I wasn't seeing her again. Now, anytime someone jokes about worst date stories, my mind goes back to that diner, the neon light reflecting off the matte black surface of the gun, the calmness with which she carried it, and the fact that she never once put it away. Even now, thinking about it, my stomach tightens at the memory. The tension of that night, the weird balance of humor and threat, is something I'll never forget. I honestly didn't think much of it when he suggested we hang out at his place. We'd already been out for a bit, grabbed food, walked around the city, stopped at a couple shops. He seemed normal enough. The kind of guy who talks a little too much about random stuff, but nothing that made me feel weird. It started raining, and he said his apartment was just a short walk away. He mentioned having some snacks, drinks, and movies, and it felt better than sitting in a wet hoodie waiting for the rain to stop. So I agreed. His building was older, with those narrow hallways that smell faintly like dust and laundry detergent. The kind where you can hear the hum of everyone's TVs through the walls. His apartment was small, living room, kitchen tucked in one corner, door to what I guessed was his bedroom. It was a little messy, but not gross. We sat on the couch, and he brought over drinks. We put on something light in the background, more for noise than actually watching. For the first half hour, it was just casual. He told me about his neighbors, his job, random stories from when he was younger. I laughed a few times. It was fine. Then, halfway through the movie, there was this muffled sound from the hallway, like someone walking by and maybe stopping at his door. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but I saw the way his eyes flicked toward the door and stayed there for a second too long. Without saying anything, he walked over and locked a deadbolt. Normal enough, I guess. But then he grabbed the back of a chair from the kitchen and dragged it in front of the door. The scraping sound against the floor made my stomach tighten. He didn't stop there. He pushed his coffee table closer to the chair, then shifted a small bookshelf so it partially blocked the door handle. It wasn't like there was a ton of furniture in the way, but it was enough to make it a hassle if someone wanted to come in, or if I wanted to get out. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my mind was suddenly way more focused on the exit than on whatever was playing on TV. He finally sat back down, smiling like nothing happened, and said something about just making sure no one interrupts us. That line sat wrong with me. I asked if he was expecting someone, and he just shook his head. I didn't push it. I figured I'd play it cool until I could find a good excuse to leave, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. I noticed how quiet it was now. Even the hallway felt dead. The next 10 minutes were just me nodding and pretending to pay attention while my brain worked overtime. My phone was in my pocket, but pulling it out felt like it would draw too much attention. I kept glancing toward the door, measuring the distance. He leaned back on the couch, legs stretched out, clearly comfortable. Too comfortable. At one point, he got up to grab something from the kitchen, and that's when I tested it. I shifted slightly like I might stand up, just to see if he reacted. He did. His head popped up instantly, like he was making sure I stayed put. When he came back, he brought more drinks. I didn't touch mine. I said I was full from earlier, but really I didn't want to put anything else in my body here. I made some comment about how late it was getting, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't. Instead, he suggested we start another movie. The idea of staying there any longer made my skin crawl. I told him I needed to get up early in the morning. He just looked at me for a moment, then said something about the rain still being heavy outside. That's when I decided I wasn't asking anymore. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. The problem was the barricade. I moved the chair first, sliding it just enough to clear a path. He was still sitting on the couch, watching me but not saying anything. Then I pushed the coffee table back into place, pretending it was no big deal, like I was just making space. When I got to the bookshelf, he finally stood up. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I kept my tone calm, said something about needing to catch my bus, and reached for the deadbolt. For a second, I thought he was going to stop me. He didn't move closer, but he stayed standing just a few feet away, watching. I unlocked the door and opened it. The hallway light spilled in, and I stepped out fast, not looking back. I could feel his eyes on me until I turned the corner toward the stairs. I didn't stop walking until I was outside in the rain, pulling my phone from my pocket to order a ride. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stand under the streetlight until a car showed up. The whole ride home, I kept thinking about that moment he started pushing things in front of the door. How casual it was for him. How he didn't even try to explain it beyond that one throwaway line. I'll never know if it was just some weird control thing or if he had something worse planned. But I do know one thing. The second someone starts making it harder for me to leave, I'm gone. And next time, I'm not stepping foot in anyone's apartment on a first date. I should have known something was off the second she suggested going back to hers. We'd only been talking for a couple of hours. The plan had been simple. A casual drink at this quiet little bar near the river, nothing serious. The kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts and the occasional clink of glasses without the bass of a club pounding in your chest. She was friendly enough, laughed at my bad jokes, and kept leaning in like she was actually interested in the conversation, like she cared about what I had to say. When we finished our drinks, she said her place was just a few streets over and suggested I come check it out. I figured why not. She made it sound innocent enough, like she'd just moved in and wanted to show off her apartment. Plus, it seemed like a better alternative to ending the night awkwardly at the bus stop, standing there while the chill crept into my bones. The walk there was short, maybe 5 minutes. The streets were mostly empty, the kind of quiet that makes every distant sound echo. A car door slamming, a dog barking in the distance, the faint hum of a neon sign buzzing somewhere down the street. Her building looked like one of those older apartment blocks that had seen better days. Chipped paint on the brick, creaky metal stair railings, and that faint, almost damp smell of concrete and mildew that older buildings carry. We went up 2 flights of stairs, the metal grating vibrating slightly under our steps, and she unlocked the door to a small apartment at the end of the hall. The second I stepped inside, something hit me. It didn't feel right. The air was heavy, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. It was too dark. No lamps on, just the faint orange glow of a streetlight coming through the blinds. I barely had time to take in the layout. Tiny living room, kitchen tucked awkwardly in the corner, before the door slammed behind me with a hard, almost mechanical thud. I spun around, heart jumping into my throat, and that's when I saw them. 3 guys, all in black hoodies and masks, standing there, blocking the exit. No words, no introduction, just silence. One of them reached out and slid the deadbolt into place. The atmosphere shifted instantly. My stomach dropped to the floor. I glanced at her, expecting some kind of explanation, some sign that this was a joke, but she didn't look surprised. She just stepped aside, as if making space for them, almost casual, like she planned this. I froze, trying to process whether this was some sick prank or if I'd walked straight into something much worse. One of the guys stepped closer, slow and deliberate, testing me, measuring my reaction. I stepped back until I hit the edge of the couch. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. The way they stood, blocking every exit, their movements precise and controlled, told me enough. My brain went through every scenario I could imagine. The window was too small to squeeze through. The door was locked. Even if I tried to run, there was nowhere to go without getting caught in that narrow hallway. The tallest one reached into his pocket. My chest tightened when I saw him pull out a pair of zip ties, the kind you see in videos where people are restrained. My hands started sweating instantly. I tried to step sideways toward the kitchen, keeping my eyes on all of them at once. The shortest one moved to block me, standing so close I could smell the stale cigarette smoke clinging to his hoodie. My mind raced. No one knew I was here. I hadn't even told a friend I was coming back with her. Then the guy with the zip ties dropped them on the coffee table with a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, like he wanted me to see them. My pulse hammered in my ears. I felt my chest tighten, the air in the room thickening around me, suffocating, heavy with anticipation. I don't know what snapped, but I realized waiting wasn't an option. I had to act. I shoved past the smallest guy with every ounce of strength I could muster and lunged for the door. The move caught them off guard, just for a fraction of a second. Enough for me to grab the deadbolt and yank it back. I heard the scrape of footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys as I fumbled them out of my pocket. I bolted down the stairs two at a time, the sound of my own footfalls deafening in the quiet building. When I hit the street, the cold air hit my lungs like fire. My legs felt like lead, my heart hammering in my chest, but I kept running, weaving through the empty streets until I was a few blocks away. I ducked into a 24-hour convenience store, the bright fluorescent lights harsh and almost painful after the dim apartment, pretending to browse the snacks until I could call a ride. My hands trembled so badly that dialing the number felt like a challenge in itself. On the way home, I replayed every detail in my head, her casual tone when she invited me over, the darkness of the apartment, the sudden slam of the door, the silent menace of the three men. I kept asking myself, what were they playing? Were they trying to scare me, or had it been something far worse? I blocked her number before I even stepped inside my door. I still haven't figured out why she did it, if she was working with them or if this was some twisted experiment in fear. Either way, I know I'll never ignore the warning signs again. Now, whenever someone casually suggests, come over, I don't just think twice. I analyze. I ask myself, where is this person really taking me? Who might be there? Is there an escape route? Even if someone seems normal, even if they're charming, even if they laugh at my jokes, I don't step inside without knowing exactly what I'm walking into. That night taught me that friendly invitation and danger waiting to happen can be separated by a single terrifying slam of a door. I didn't even plan to let him drive me home. That wasn't the plan. We were supposed to meet for coffee, talk a bit, then go our separate ways. A quick, casual meeting, the kind that doesn't linger, but the rain came out of nowhere like the sky had just decided it wanted to pour, full-on buckets slamming against the pavement. He offered me a ride and I hesitated. The thought of standing at the bus stop or waiting for an Uber in the cold, soaked through to my bones, didn't sound great either. So I agreed. His car was older, the kind that smells like a mix of leather seats and something faintly metallic. Not unpleasant, but with a worn, lived-in feeling, like it had been on a lot of long, quiet drives, collecting the faint residue of countless people and places. I buckled in, and he asked if I wanted music. I said sure, and he put on a random playlist with low, bass-heavy songs that filled the silence of the car. The first 10 minutes were fine. We talked a little, laughed a little. I even started to relax. But then the conversation slowed, the words thinning until there were only long stretches of music, and the rhythmic smear of windshield wipers pushing water across the glass. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me for just a little too long at red lights, like he was studying me rather than making casual conversation. We were maybe halfway to my place when he asked if I wanted gum. I said yes, expecting it to be in the cup holder or somewhere obvious. But instead, he leaned forward and opened the glove compartment. Everything inside shifted. A small flashlight rolled forward, a few crumpled receipts fluttered to the floor, and then a hunting knife slid out and clattered onto the floor mat by my feet. It wasn't small. The blade was long, silver with a darkened edge, and the handle was wrapped in worn leather. My first thought was maybe it was for fishing or camping. But before I could even ask, he looked over at me and grinned. Not a casual, friendly grin, slow, deliberate, like he was gauging my reaction. Then he said, "Don't worry, it's only for special occasions." I froze. I didn't know what that was supposed to mean. My body betrayed me. My hands felt heavy, my stomach twisting into knots. The smile didn't help. It wasn't the kind of grin people give when joking. It was calculating watching. I reached down carefully by the handle and set the knife back on the dash. My hand shook slightly, and I felt a strange dissonance. Part of me wanted to act calm, part of me wanted to bolt. He closed the glove compartment without saying anything else, but the atmosphere in the car changed instantly. The music felt louder, more oppressive. The rain's patter against the roof seemed sharper, more urgent. Every reflection in the wet streets outside looked like it was moving closer, closing in. I kept staring out the window, pretending to be interested in the passing streetlights while quietly counting turns. I was trying to memorize landmarks, street signs, Anything that could help me retrace the road if I needed to get out. Every street we took felt deliberate, winding through side roads instead of sticking to main streets. He said it was to avoid traffic, but there wasn't a single car around. My pulse was hammering, and I kept touching my phone in my jacket pocket, trying to reassure myself that it was still there. I considered opening maps to check our location, but I couldn't risk him noticing. About 10 minutes later, we slowed near a series of old warehouses. The buildings were dark, abandoned looking, with broken windows reflecting the streetlights. I recognized the area. It was completely the opposite direction from my place. My chest tightened, and I asked if he was lost. He just shrugged and said he knew a shortcut. My stomach lurched. I told him I just wanted to be dropped off somewhere with lights around, anywhere I could call a ride safely. He laughed, the sound casual, but it didn't reach his eyes. I felt my fingers clenching around my phone so tightly that my knuckles ached, the screen nearly cracking under the pressure. Finally, he steered back toward a main road, and I spotted a gas station up ahead. I told him I needed to grab something to drink and asked if he could pull in. He hesitated, and then, as if remembering something, he nodded. As soon as the car stopped, I unbuckled and got out before he could say anything. I went straight inside, pretending to browse the fridges, my ears straining for any sound of him. I waited until I saw him drive off, then ordered a ride from my phone. I didn't even buy anything. I just stood there, heart hammering, until he was gone. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the couch, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I kept replaying that night in my head. I honestly thought I'd met someone normal for once. We'd been talking for maybe 2 weeks before we decided to meet in person. Nothing crazy, just a drink at this bar I like downtown. It's not fancy, but it's clean, always busy, and the lighting makes everyone look a little better than they actually do. She showed up about 10 minutes after me, wearing this oversized leather jacket and a black dress. First impression, she had that kind of face that makes you think she's really confident, but the way she kept fiddling with her ring made me think she was nervous. We grabbed a booth in the corner away from the main crowd. The music was loud enough that you had to lean in a little to talk, which made it feel a bit more personal. We ordered drinks, chatted about work, random stuff, the usual first date filler. She laughed a lot, maybe too much, but I didn't think anything of it. An hour in, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Nothing weird there, just nature calling. I was gone maybe 3 minutes. When I got back, she was scrolling through her phone like nothing happened. I sat down, took a sip of my drink, and we kept talking. About 20 minutes later, I started feeling not right. My head felt heavy, my mouth went dry, and it was like my body was trying to run a marathon while I was still sitting there. My vision got fuzzy at the edges, and for a second, I thought maybe I was just drunk faster than usual. But I only had 2 drinks. I tried to focus on what she was saying, but my brain was processing everything on a delay. I kept losing track of her words halfway through. Then she suggested we head out and go somewhere more private. I don't know if she meant my place or hers. Honestly, I don't think I would have made it that far anyway. I mumbled something about needing some air and stumbled toward the door. I could feel her eyes on me, like she was waiting for me to collapse. That's when one of the bartenders, a guy I kind of know because I come here a lot, stepped in front of me. He asked if I was feeling okay, and when I told him I wasn't, he gave this quick look over my shoulder toward the booth we'd been sitting in. Then he told me to come with him. He led me to the back room near the kitchen. My head was spinning so bad I had to lean on the wall just to stay upright. He handed me a glass of water and told me to sit down while he called someone. Here's where it gets weird. He told me they'd been keeping an eye on my date from the moment she walked in. Apparently, the bar had an issue before with people slipping things into drinks, so the staff now paid extra attention whenever someone left their drink unattended. When I went to the bathroom, she had pulled a tiny packet from her jacket pocket, poured something into my glass, stirred it with a straw, and then acted like nothing happened. They caught the whole thing on the security cameras. I just sat there, dizzy and sweating, trying to process that the girl I had been laughing with for the past hour had literally tried to drug me. The bartender said they'd already called the police. He also told me they'd taken my drink to the back so no one could mess with it until it was tested. About 5 minutes later, I heard shouting from the front. Another staff member had stopped her at the door when she tried to leave. She was apparently denying everything, saying I must have imagined feeling sick, but the footage didn't lie. By the time the cops showed up, I could barely stand. They took my statement while an ambulance came to check me out. I don't remember much after that except lying in the ER with a nurse telling me my heart rate was all over the place. The police later told me the substance in my drink was a strong sedative, not the kind you can just buy at a pharmacy. They didn't tell me exactly what her plan was, but I didn't need the details to know it wasn't good. I found out later she had a history. Nothing that had led to charges before, but enough incidents for the cops to take her seriously. The scary part is, if the bar hadn't had cameras, if the staff hadn't been paying attention, I probably would have ended up in a car or someplace I didn't recognize with no memory of how I got there. It's been a couple of weeks since then, and I still can't drink anything I didn't see being made right in front of me. I keep replaying the moment I walked back from the bathroom, completely clueless that my glass already had something in it. I've been back at that bar once since, just to thank the staff again. The bartender told me she's banned from the place now, and that the footage is still part of an ongoing case. When I think about it, the worst part isn't even that she did it. It's how normal she acted after. Like she could laugh with me, make eye contact, and still be planning something that could have gone very, very wrong for me. I didn't expect my first date horror story to end with me in a hospital bed, but here we are. I thought the night was going fine. It wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad either. We met a week ago and he seemed normal enough. He wasn't over the top, didn't send weird pickup lines, just asked if I wanted to grab a bite and maybe walk around town. We met outside this small diner near the bus station. It was one of those places with sticky menus and neon lights that hum a little too loud. He was already there, leaning on the wall, scrolling through his phone. First impression, a bit awkward, but I figured he was just nervous. The conversation during dinner wasn't anything special. He told me about his big plans and how he was done with the dating game and just wanted something real. I mostly listened, nodding along while eating my burger. The weird part was he kept glancing at my phone whenever I set it on the table like he was trying to see my screen. I brushed it off. After dinner, we walked toward the river. It was chilly, but the city lights reflected on the water in this calm, postcard kind of way. We sat on a bench for a while. He didn't try anything creepy. If anything, it was almost boring. Around 10:30, I told him I was going to head home. That's when he offered to make sure I got there safe. I said no thanks, that I was fine taking the bus. He gave this half smile like he knew something I didn't and said he'd text me later. The bus ride was quiet. I scrolled on my phone, zoned out. When I got home, I tossed my bag on the couch and started changing into sweats. That's when I heard it. A tiny, high-pitched beep from inside my bag. At first, I thought it was my earbuds dying or something. But when I dug around, I couldn't find anything that would make that sound. It beeped again. I pulled everything out, my wallet, lip balm, receipts, phone charger, until I felt something hard at the bottom wedged in the lining. I turned the bag upside down and out rolled this little white disc. I knew what it was immediately, an AirTag. My stomach dropped. I'd never owned one. I didn't even know anyone who used them. I held it like it was going to burn me. I grabbed my phone and opened the Find My app just to check if it was mine. No, not registered to me. That's when my phone buzzed with a notification. AirTag detected moving with you. It had apparently been tracking me since 8:47 p.m., right after we left the diner. I froze. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but the idea of someone knowing exactly where I was made my skin crawl. I didn't have to guess who put it there. I called him, and he actually picked up. I asked him why there was an AirTag in my bag. He didn't even sound embarrassed. He said something like, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure we could keep in touch, you know. If you change your number or something, I could still find you." Like it was normal. I told him that was insane, that he had no right to put anything in my stuff. He laughed, said I was overreacting, and that it was just a bit of fun. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I hung up and blocked his number immediately. Then I wrapped the AirTag in tinfoil from the kitchen and threw it in the bottom of my trash bin. I wasn't keeping it near me. But I couldn't relax. I kept thinking maybe he put something else in my stuff. I dumped my whole bag out again, checked every pocket, even checked my coat and shoes. Nothing else. Still, I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made me tense up. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the gravel by my window. When I looked, the street was empty. The next morning, I got another notification. The AirTag was still nearby. which meant he hadn't come to take it back, or worse, he didn't care if I knew. I took it straight to the police station. The officer at the desk scanned it and confirmed it was registered to him. They said they'd look into it, but couldn't promise much since he hadn't technically harmed me. It suggested I keep an eye on call if I felt unsafe. That didn't exactly help me feel better. I went home and ordered new locks for my door. I even considered staying with a friend for a few days, but part of me felt like if I left, it would just give him more room to snoop around. For the rest of the week, I kept my curtains closed and avoided walking anywhere alone. I didn't post anything online, not even random stories, because I didn't want him to know if I was home or not. 3 days later, I got a letter in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper that just said, "You shouldn't throw away gifts." I didn't even need to think about who sent it. I called the police again, showed them the letter. They said they'd add it to the report, but unless he threatened me directly, they couldn't arrest him. That night, I slept with my phone in my hand and a kitchen knife on the table next to my bed. Every little sound felt like it meant something. It's been over a month now. I haven't seen him in person since that night, but sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched when I walk home from work. I catch myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the cars parked along my street to see if any of them look out of place. I don't carry the same bag anymore. I triple check everything I own when I come back from anywhere. And I've deleted every dating app I add. I thought bad dates meant awkward silence or someone costing you. I didn't think it could mean someone literally tracking you home. But now I know it can.